We don't like this budget. Economists don't like this budget. But there's somebody else that doesn't like this budget, and they're actually in Mark Carney's caucus.
It falls short of these specific promises in our platform, and it unfortunately falls well short of the wartime effort that many of us thought we'd deliver. My kids shouldn't pay for today's military or for me to save $400 of income taxes.
Mark Carney and the Liberals are trying to convince Canadians that the 2025 budget will solve all of our problems. And even though they posted it publicly, they are counting on you not even reading it. And if you do, not understanding it. Well, we did read it, and we do understand it. And here's the real problem. Even Liberal MPs are now speaking out against it. So, here are the three most disgraceful parts of the 2025 Mark Carney Liberal budget. Let's take a look. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the cover page that the Liberals put out there for the Canada Strong Budget 2025. Here's the first issue. We've talked about this a little bit before, but here it is in black and white. The Liberals are effectively eliminating the luxury tax on aircraft and vessels. Federal government imposes a tax on subject vehicles and subject aircraft with a value above $100,000 and subject vessels, example boats, with a value above $250,000. The luxury tax is equal to the lesser of 10% of the total value the subject item and 20% of the value above the relevant threshold. The tax is generally imposed on sales, importations, leases, and certain improvements of subject vehicles, subject aircraft, and subject vessels. Budget 2025 proposes to amend the Select Luxury Items Tax Act to end the luxury tax on subject aircraft and subject vessels. All instances of the tax would cease to be payable after Budget Day, including the tax on sales, the tax on importations, and the tax on improvements. So, let's just put this into perspective. Canadians can't afford food. Canadians can't afford homes. Canadians can't afford to heat themselves. Canadians can't really afford anything right now. And the priority of this government is to eliminate the luxury tax on aircraft and boats, aka yachts. Why would they do this? Well, the claim that they're making is that, well, otherwise we're looking at job losses for some of these companies that are manufacturing these planes and manufacturing these boats for the people that buy them. Well, who are the people that buy them? They're millionaires and billionaires. The average Canadian doesn't buy planes, doesn't buy boats. And we're not looking at some sort of massive surge in people buying planes and boats. After all, I thought you guys were for the environment. I thought there's a carbon footprint. Why would you be cutting taxes on some of the most carbon-emitting vehicles on the planet? That doesn't make a lot of sense now, does it? So where did this come from? Well, it came from a lot of lobbying. Specifically, it came from a lot of lobbying from Bombardier. They've been lobbying really, really hard for the government to do this because they're saying, well, everyone is buying products from elsewhere and not from Canada. Well, make a better product, Bombardier. How about that? You're the one that is pricing your stuff. You're the one that is making it. You think rich people actually care about paying a little bit more if it's a superior product? Probably not, because they want the best of the best of the best. So why don't you actually do that? So for Mark Carney to say that, this is generational, generational, yeah, for sure. It's affecting a new generation of rich people that actually want to buy these things. Give me a break. So if you're buying a $100 million super yacht, guess what? You get to save around $10 million. Crazy. Now, this is just the warm-up, folks. Now we're getting into the really problematic parts. This is a huge problem, folks. So one of the things that they're going to be doing is ending the tax on the underused housing part of the market. What does that mean? The underused housing tax took effect on January 1st, 2022, and applies to certain owners of vacant or underused residential property in Canada, generally non-resident, non-Canadians. The UHT is imposed on an annual basis at a rate of 1% on the value of the property. Budget 2025 proposes to eliminate the UHT as of the 2025 calendar year. As a result, no UHT would be payable and no UHT returns would be required to be filed in respect of the 2025 and subsequent calendar years. Now, this is where they justify it. To simplify Canada's tax system and reduce compliance costs for taxpayers and administrative costs for government, and given other efforts such as the federal foreign buyer ban and municipal and provincial vacant home taxes, Budget 2025 announces the government's intention to eliminate the underused housing tax as of the 2025 calendar year. What is this underused housing tax? Well, for those that don't know, one of the challenges to the Canadian housing market and actually finding a home was that you would have foreign investors, or just foreign people in general, buying up houses in Canada. And then they would sit there empty, waiting for them to appreciate, and then they would just wait for them to appreciate to a certain degree and then sell them. Or you would have corporations that are buying them, and you would have executives stay in them in condos and apartments and that sort of thing. But for the most of the time, they would sit there vacant. So what is this? Well, they had to pay a tax on that of about 1% per year, and that was implemented in 2022 to try to discourage that. And you also have some other people, allegedly in Canada, that are buying homes and doing the same thing, just letting them sit there. But I'm not sure why you would do that and not actually have them rented and make some income, but that's another discussion altogether. And they justify this by saying, well, listen, don't worry. We're not favoring the people that are actually buying these homes that live abroad, because we still have this foreign buyer ban in place. So don't worry about that. Well, they talk about the foreign buyer ban, but they don't really give you details on it. Here's what it actually does. So this was announced in 2024, the extension of the foreign buyer ban. Now, that means that this is temporary, folks. So I'm not going to read this. You can read this at your leisure. But this is essentially saying, oh, it's bad that foreign money is coming into Canada and buying our real estate up. Well, we're not going to issue a permanent ban on this. We're just going to extend this until 2027. Now, the issue with this is there's a bunch of exceptions. There's corporate exceptions. There's student exceptions. There's many different exceptions to this. So there's a bunch of the market that's actually still wide open. Now, interesting. Why would Mark Carney want to do this? Because isn't this going to allow people that already own these homes, that are living abroad or that are, stationed abroad, isn't it going to help them save money? Well, yes, it does, because it doesn't actually impact and prevent anybody from continuing to own these homes. All it does is give them a tax break. And my mind immediately went to China, because there's a bunch of real estate in Vancouver and elsewhere in Canada that is either owned or is being bought up by these Chinese folks, particularly in the United Front Work Department, or billionaires, or any of the other demographic that's in the senior party leadership that is going to be benefiting of this and is in these convenient exceptions of the foreign buyer ban. So they're all going to be benefiting a lot from this tax break. 1% of all of these properties. So if you have $1 million property, what's 1% of that? Well, that's going to be about $10,000. So how many properties are they going to own? Well, who knows? And who knows how big the property is going to be? They may own dozens or hundreds, and that adds up quick. So to actually take away one of the things that was trying to curb the housing crisis, right? They've actually just taken that away. So that's a huge red flag when it comes to this. And this seems to aim at people that are actually not in Canada. Big, big problem. And you need to be asking why. This brings us, conveniently, to the biggest problem in this budget, in my humble opinion. At least when it comes to a sleight of hand. Mark Carney's crown jewel, Build Canada Homes. Launching Build Canada Homes. Funding and proposed legislation for Build Canada Homes to support the construction of affordable homes and a more productive home building industry. The expected impact is to increase the number of homes across Canada, increase the size of non-market housing sector, increase productivity in the housing sector, and improve housing affordability. Increasing affordable and non-market housing will benefit groups in greatest need of affordable housing, including lower-income individuals and families, and equity-seeking groups, including Indigenous people, racialized people, women, seniors, and persons with disabilities. This measure will also indirectly benefit men, who are more likely to work in construction and account for 86.4% of the employees in this sector. Can't be a liberal budget without some identity politics in here, right? So they're trying to say, well, Build Canada Homes, this is going to solve all of the housing problems. It's going to add homes for everybody, and it's going to help people that are of different races, because apparently we want to slag on people of different races and saying that you folks are the ones that are in the most need of this. And it's going to also benefit men. Men, don't worry. We haven't forgotten about you. You know, we don't hate men. Well, wait a minute. Are they trying to acknowledge that gender actually plays a role in job preferences? Wait a minute. Shouldn't we talk about the gender pay gap? If we're going to talk about that, folks, they don't talk about the gender pay gap in the federal budget because they can't admit to a gendered preference when it comes to statistical choice in terms of occupation, and the gender pay gap in the same thing, because they kind of conflict, right? So let's not talk about that right now. But I thought that was a very stunning admission from the left in their own budget. But the point is they're trying to convince people that they're going to be, building homes for everybody, and it's going to be great. Well, let's just take another look at some more of the budget when it comes to Build Canada Homes. Supercharging home building. Canada is facing a steep housing supply gap, one that threatens affordability, opportunity, and the ability for Canadians to build a life and future here at home. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, that's CMHC, estimates that to restore affordability to 2019 levels, home building must nearly double from its current pace of around 280,000 homes per year. We're going to get back to that number, to between 430,000 and 480,000 homes per year over the next decade. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates 290,000 homes per year would be needed to close the supply gap. Canadians demand immediate action, and this government is delivering with the urgency that this moment requires, with bold action to unlock supply and bring affordability back within reach. We've heard that one before. From eliminating the GST for first-time homebuyers on homes at or under $1 million to launching Build Canada Homes, a new federal agency that will drive investment and public-private cooperation, we will build faster and smarter. Here's a graph that they show in the budget. Unprecedented investment in building homes for Canadians. Canada's most ambitious housing plan in a generation. $16 billion of existing programming, $7 billion for Build Canada Homes, and $2 billion for tax measures. So they're saying, oh, we're investing all this money. It's the most we've ever invested over a generation. Well, $16 billion of it was from the previous Liberal government. I thought they were doing a terrible job at managing our finances, Mark Carney. Guess they weren't doing so terrible a job because you're keeping all of their home investments. Anyway, and you're going to be spending $7 billion on Build Canada Homes. $7 billion, folks, to set up a new agency. Really? Interesting. Now, that's not just to set up the federal agency. They're going to be using it to spend money on actual homes, allegedly. Well, that's interesting. But again, we'll come back to that. And $2 billion in tax cuts. So they're estimating that a whole bunch of Canadians are going to go out there and buy a new home, which they can't afford. And they're going to be saving $2 billion over that period of time because they're not going to be charging GST on that. Great. Thanks. Now here's another graph. And this is one that we're really going to key in on. Chart 3.1, historical housing starts and the building pace needed to close the housing supply gap. So this is the government's attempt to say, well, this is where we were, and this is where we are, and where we need to be. So let's take a look at this. So you have around 200,000, and it says where we were, 2010 to 2019 average, 200,000 a year. It says this is where we are. Well, we've already gone up by 80,000. Now, look at where it says average of last 6 months annualized. Well, that's interesting. What does that mean? This is something that a lot of people in data that kind of like to skew numbers love to do. So what this means is they're saying, well, look, we're taking the housing from the last 6 months and we're just going to prorate that and essentially double it and saying, well, the amount that was completed in the last 6 months, that's the amount that we can expect to be completed over the whole year. So they're trying to say 280,000 were actually going to be completed in 2025, despite the fact that 2025 isn't actually finished yet. And this is where they get that previous number. And that's going to be a major problem for them very, very shortly. So then they say, well, we're at 280,000 and we just need to kind of close that gap. We just need between 15 to 200 to actually get to that target, which is that quote unquote double the amount that we need. And it says underneath, the gray area represents estimates of the building pace needed over the next decade to close the housing supply gap, ranging from 290,000 per the PBO to 480,000 per the CMHC upper end estimate. So that's a heck of a gap. So you're saying the PBO says, well, we only need 290,000, but the CMHC says we need 480,000. Well, what is it? That's a massive gap. So you're just saying, well, we're just going to throw that in there because these two agencies completely disagree with each other. We're not going to find out what the actual number is. We're just going to put that out there because that's going to be way too much work for us to do. But there's also a reason that they don't want to do that work. They show another chart. And I'm glad they did this because this kind of gives us a base. Now, this chart is the labor productivity in residential construction. So you can see that from 2000 down to 2008 showed a steep decline over the last Liberal government when it comes to housing. Now, isn't that interesting? And then from 2008, where the financial crash happened, up to 2015, you saw a steady increase in it. And you saw it kind of peaked at around 2016, and then it dropped leading into COVID. And then there was a whole bunch of people that really got after housing at the height of COVID. And then everything just dropped because the bubble burst and everybody stopped buying houses. So what's missing here? Well, let's just fill in all the information that they've missed in this graph. So number one, this is the housing accelerator when it launched. Remember that? Remember when housing was falling like a stone and the Liberals said, I know, we're going to implement this new $4 billion fund, which increased to $8 billion, and we're going to just throw billions of dollars around the country, and that's going to fix the housing prices. Well, if you look, that didn't. It really didn't. Housing bottomed out at the bottom of 2024, and this was despite this Housing Accelerator Fund. And here's the other thing that we need to add. This was actually a 20-year low. So we had lower productivity in our residential construction than the 2008 financial crash. How can you have a lower productivity rate than the 2008 financial crash? So everyone who loves to cherry pick and go after Harper and saying, well, housing starts were down there. He was actually managing a world real estate financial crash. And he was able to reverse that and pick productivity back up. And the Liberals, under their Housing Accelerator Fund, throwing more money. That's part of that $16 billion in existing funding in there, folks. Just saying. It did nothing. It literally did nothing. So when Pierre Poilievre says the Housing Accelerator doesn't work, all it does is fund bureaucracies, the data's right there. The government is showing it to you in their own budget, folks. You can't make this up. And this is why we love when the government gives us their own data. Now they're trying to say, oh, well, we've been experiencing, a problem and we're going to fix this. Now, let's continue. So that 280,000 number that they said that we're going to be building in 2025. Yeah, there's a big problem with that. So this is data from the CMHC, which the government said that they were referencing in their budget. So if you see, you'll see on the left is the date. And you'll see in the column next to that, this is where we're really concerned about, which is starts, right? This is the number of homes that they're starting in these particular years. So you can see in 2022, we were at 261,000. Housing Accelerator gets put in. In 2023, that drops by 21,000. In 2024, kind of stabilizes around 245,000. That makes sense as per our previous graph. So where's this 280,000? Well, it's not here, folks. What they project is on the low end, there will be 226,000 housing starts done in 2025 with a high end estimate of 243. 249 next year, and doesn't get any better. So let's go to another graph by the CMHC. Again, you don't see any numbers even getting close to 300,000. So what this is they're basically combining single and semi-detached, row townhouses, and apartments. So those are the numbers that you see in terms of housing starts. Now, in 2025, 2026, and 2027, you can see that it's all expected to go down from 2024. And this is the actual report that this is from, the CMHC, a government agency. So, what the heck is going on here? We found another report that actually explains what is happening and why that one graph where Mark Carney shows that and says, oh, this is based on the last 6 months annualized. So the cherry picking of data going on there was pretty disgraceful. So let's take a look at this CMHC report, which explains why that happens and how they got to this 280,000. Recent years' housing start highs boost housing stock. Unlike housing starts, which signal future supply, completions represent actual additions to the housing stock, homes people occupy. Completions dipped slightly across the 7 CMAs, that's basically, municipalities like Toronto and Vancouver and Mississauga and things like that, in the first 6 months of 2025, but stayed near record highs. Mid-2025 data showed declines in condominium apartment starts across all markets except Edmonton and Ottawa. The decline was particularly pronounced in Toronto, where a pullback in investor demand during the first half of 2025 reduced project feasibility, leading to cancellations, delays, and a sharp drop in starts. This pullback follows a surge in pre-sales in 2021 and 2022, driven by near record low interest rates and strong rental demand that attracted investors to Toronto's condominium market. The surge triggered a wave of condominium completions over the following years. These newly finished units increased resale supply and reduced the immediate need for new homes. As a result, pre-construction sales slowed, limiting new condominium apartment starts in the first half of 2025. So what does that all mean? So Mark Carney is dishonestly conflating housing starts with housing completions, and he's not telling you that he's doing it. So what happened is in the years leading up, so 2021, 2022, remember that when interest rates were through the floor?
Interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
A bunch of people bought homes, specifically condos. And then what happened? Well, condos don't get finished overnight, do they? No, they take years and years and years to build. Well, turns out in beginning of 2025, which is the 6 months that Mark Carney is talking about, a bunch of those condominium buildings where everyone pre-bought back in those years, they were finished. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to continue. Why? Because interest rates went up, and interest rates are up. So a bunch of those homes that were actually completed from back in those years, a whole surge of them were actually completed in the first part of 2025. So Mark Carney says, aha, that's a nice little bucket of data. Let's take that and then we'll annualize that, saying, well, all those homes that were completed in that 6 months, we're just going to double that and say that's now 1 year. And that makes us look really, really great. That's where they get this 280,000 false figure from, folks. And when you do that, then you say, well, we only need now this much more. We're doing really good. See, Canadians, we're doing good. We're on the track. They're not. They are not. This is statistical dishonestly. And as they say, you can make statistics say anything that you want them to, but this is the real data. Okay? So that's reprehensible that this is what they're starting Build Canada Homes off of, with, is completely misrepresenting the data. Now, remember when Mark Carney had said earlier in the budget that this is going to build affordable homes and help people and it's going to double our housing stock? Well, there's a problem with that, folks. This is the Build Canada Homes website on the Government of Canada. And it says driving long-term affordable housing solutions. That doesn't mean housing that you can afford. That means quote-unquote affordable housing, which is very different. Canada's housing crisis is too big to solve with a business-as-usual approach. That's why the federal government is taking a bold new approach with unprecedented investments to increase housing supply in Canada. Build Canada Homes is a new federal agency that will build affordable housing at scale. It will leverage public lands, offer flexible financial incentives, attract private capital, facilitate large portfolio projects, and support modern manufacturers to build the homes that Canada needs. Here's the issue here. So what they are focused on is affordable housing and co-op housing. These types of dwellings are typically targeted for low-income or no-income people. This is not for your university students coming out of school wanting to buy a home. This is not for them. This is going to be government-owned or government-subsidized housing. Now, I haven't been able to find anywhere in the budget where it says who actually is going to own these homes other than the federal government. So when Mark Carney said the government needs to get into the home building business, this is what he's talking about. So they want to provide homes for people to live in that the government owns. Now, this happens at the municipal level, but I don't think I've ever seen it happen at the federal level, and that's an issue for me. The other thing is he's trying to position this as, well, we're going to build all these modular homes and it's going to solve all of Canada's housing supply problem. Yeah, but there's less than 1 million homeless people in Canada. There's less than 1 million people that are considered very low income in Canada, like at risk. All of that is less than 1 million in totality. So when you're saying that you're going to be doubling the housing supply every year, okay, even if you did that, that's only going to cover that 5 years. Everybody else that's not in that category is probably not going to want to live in a tiny shoebox of a home. The people that are going to want to live there don't want to live there. They need to live there. Everybody else wants a home that they can choose, wants a home that they can afford. So this is the biggest problem with this. And who's going to benefit from this? The Canadians themselves, they aren't going to own the homes, so they're not going to be having any equity in it. The government, they're the ones shelling out the money on the taxpayer dime, so who's going to benefit? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the main people that are going to benefit are the companies that are building these modular homes. Turns out Brookfield owns, some stakes in some modular homes. Now, at this point, haven't been able to connect which housing corporations are actually going to be building these, but I think we need to watch that very closely. So this is the biggest boondoggle of this entire budget, is this Build Canada Homes, because it's presented completely dishonestly, and they're using smoke and mirrors everywhere to try to mislead Canadians as to what it's actually going to accomplish. It is not going to be building homes for your middle class Canadians. It is not going to be building homes for the people that want to afford a home, that do have some savings but still can't afford it. It's not for you. It's for homeless people. It's to get people into these homes and keep them there. That's what it's intended to do. Now, we don't like this budget. Economists don't like this budget. But there's somebody else that doesn't like this budget, and they're actually in Mark Carney's caucus. And they're actually apparently still ticked off that they didn't get a cabinet position after selling all their stock, that he decided to put out an actual video on it. Take a look.
Now to the bad, or more fairly, where expectations were set at a level that we failed to meet, including on the question of generational investments. First, stalled climate action. I don't want to be too dismissive here, as the Canadian Climate Institute rightly highlighted the importance of a strengthened industrial carbon price. But apart from that promise, there was nothing new. Yes, we are moving forward with strong methane rules and clean investment tax credits, and these are key pieces. But we are also cutting tree planting, moving away from an emissions cap, winding down greener homes, and the budget offers no new money for climate action. On housing, we've got the beginnings of Build Canada Homes, a tax cut for new home buyers, and some dollars for housing-enabling infrastructure that are important but unfortunately very unlikely to move the needle on development charges to a degree we would like. It falls short of these specific promises in our platform, and it unfortunately falls well short of the wartime effort that many of us thought we'd deliver. Now, the fiscal frame of spend less to invest more is actually one that I like. Operational books generally in balance, and a capital deficit spending more easily justified. But the budget adds $140 billion in new spending over 5 years, $90 billion net after savings, and only 36% of the net new spending is capital. Related, there is a lot of deficit financing here to cover non-capital new spending. Yes, honoring our initial 2% commitment to NATO made sense, and a middle-class tax cut was a platform promise. But these are far and away the two largest financial commitments. They are non-capital, and they should be paid for. My kids shouldn't pay for today's military or for me to save $400 of income taxes. And much-needed OAS reform, the largest non-capital growing expenditure, it still isn't part of our political conversation. Now, the ugly. And there isn't a lot that falls in this category, thankfully. First, we see the budget commit to a new inefficient fossil fuel subsidy for LNG facilities. Look, if there's a business case for LNG, there is a business case. We do not need more public dollars chasing fossil fuels. Worse, we see major cuts of over $2.5 billion over 4 years to international development assistance. Real Keir Starmer energy that unfortunately caters to a prevailing, albeit short-sighted current view among wealthy donor countries. A Pearsonian budget this is not.
So this is Nathaniel Erskine Smith coming out publicly talking about everything he hates about this budget. Now, prior to this, he talked about the stuff that he liked about this budget, and if you want to watch that, as always, all of our sources for this video are in the description, but that's what he says. Now, it's interesting because this is actually what our commentary was, is that Mark Carney is actually going to be ticking everybody off when it comes to this budget. So for the people that want oil and gas, doesn't really do anything for them. There's no pipelines, there's no projects, and there's nothing that really commits to removing any legislation that allows those projects to move ahead. So that's one part. The pro-climate people, like Nathaniel Erskine Smith, are saying, what the heck? You cut the tree planting program, you cut this, you cut that, and there's nothing here. So you're ticking off those people. And for the pro-union people, you're cutting the public service. So you're ticking off those people. So how are you going to make anybody happy with this budget? Now, why is Nathaniel Erskine Smith coming out against this? In some cases, it doesn't matter because he's a liberal, but in some cases it does. Because there's a lot of hypothesis that he's actually going to be resigning very shortly to try to run for the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party to take on Doug Ford. Who knows? But the fact that you have a liberal coming out and actually chiding this budget publicly on his own YouTube channel, right? It's not like he did this as part of some organized event. He just came out and said this budget, it's not great. That's a bit of a problem. bit of a problem. And you got to wonder, is the media going to be picking this up? Are they going to be riding this into the sunset like they have with Pierre Poilievre and everybody else, that a Liberal is publicly speaking out against Mark Carney's first budget? Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, he says it's the first budget and we have to give him some time. No. This is not the first budget. This is Mark Carney's budget. And it's not even Mark Carney's first budget because he's been advising Trudeau for a while now. And this is the same Liberal government with the same MPs, with the same ministers that have been here since 2015. So I know you're trying to say that, and you're trying to remain kind of balanced here, and you're trying to appeal to Canadians. But if a Liberal is trying to appeal to Canadians by chastising Mark Carney's own budget, what does that say about the actual budget itself? And why should we believe a thing that the Liberals tell us?